Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Karen Rice. I'm going to show you how to paint a step-by-step atmospheric wildflowers watercolour painting. I'm going to take you through lots of techniques including masking fluid, using salt and scrubbing off to create this lovely atmospheric watercolour painting. Here are the materials I will be using. I'm using my masking pen. I've got 4 watercolours, artist watercolours from Winsor Newton, Ultramarine, Quinacridone Gold, Cadmium Yellow and Opera Rose. I'm using Winsor Newton Artists gummed block pad 10 by 14 and it's got a rough surface. And I'm using my black velvet brushes, a size 14 and size 4 with my palette. Links for where you can purchase these materials will be in the description below. Just click on show more, as you can see from this photograph. On some other devices you may see a little down arrow, just click on that and it will take you to the description as well. What I'm doing now is I'm masking out the main flowers wet on dry with my masking pen. You can use masking fluid from a pot as well. As you can see on the right there, I've mixed up a quinacridone wash, a cadmium yellow wash, an opera rose wash and a cadmium yellow plus a touch of ultramarine wash, and these washes are for the first stage of my painting, wet in wet. Let's wet your paper with a large brush. I'm using my size 14 black velvet brush. You can see I'm starting with my lightest wash first, that's the cadmium yellow, and I'm just putting this lightly onto this wet background, wet in wet, and at the top there I've just diluted that yellow a little bit more because it's the background. I want it to fade away so it creates depth and distance in my painting. I just want to put these pink marks in, wet into wet, so they can look like distant flowers, like blurry photographs sort of things, but it creates a really nice effect. I'm putting in the Quinacridone Gold now, and I'm always getting fresh paint. As you see, I do a couple of strokes and reload my brush, and that way I get more control over the consistency of paint on the watercolour paper because it doesn't dry out too quickly because I'm constantly putting fresh paint on. As you can see here now, I've mixed up some of the pink with a touch of blue, and I'm putting in these sort of more purpley shade flowers, damp into wet, into the background, so it's slightly creamier, and I'm just putting them in there, damp into wet as I say. Just make sure you keep getting fresh paint, especially when you're painting over a yellowy area, otherwise the paint will end up looking a bit brown. In the last few clips I've included a lot more of my water pot and palette. This is the sort of view that members get with the membership benefits, and they also get longer, more in-depth tutorials. If that's something that interests you, why not give my membership a try? Just click join for just $4.99 a month and you can cancel anytime. For more details about the membership, please see in the description below. You can see here I'm using the Quinacridone Gold and the Ultramarine to paint some of these foreground grasses with my size 14 brush. So I'm really heavily loading it with this lovely mid-green paint and painting it damp into wet, so the paint's slightly creamier than the surface of the painting. And I'm just using, this brush carries so much paint, it allows me just to keep on painting. I've given my brush a really good rinse there because I want to mix up some pink with the yellow, and I'm just painting this lovely light orangey colour in the background, just to really just make it look like other wildflowers, really mix up those colours. It's amazing the different variety of colours you can get with the 3 primaries that I'm using, the cadmium yellow, the ultramarine and the opera rose, with the quinacridone gold, just to give it a little bit more oomph. So I'm adding a bit of pink to that sort of lavender violet colour and painting that on, just sort of damp into damp now, just to get a variety of rusty sort of colours almost in the background. I've added a little bit more blue now. So your brush, really, you want it to be sort of creamier paint now, so you put your darker tones in the foreground, the softer ones in the distance, again creating depth in your painting. using this lovely black velvet brush. I mean, it really does hold so much paint and it has such a beautiful point. I'm using this, I'm just flicking my wrist and really getting these lovely grasses in there, just having a lot of fun as well at the same time. And you can vary your colours, put a little bit more quinacridone gold in, touch more ultramarine, so you've got these different shades of grasses as well. As you saw there, I'm just applying a sprinkle of sea salt on the surface of my damp painting. I'm using the end of my tube of paint instead of the plastic card in this instance if you don't have one, and I'm just lifting off the damp paint. You have to do this quite swiftly in order to remove the paint. It's a lot of fun. It creates some nice textures. As you can see here, the salt has dried. Make sure it's dried properly. Then you can just brush it off with kitchen towel. Once the salt's removed, you can then remove your masking fluid, and I'm using my framing tape, or you can use masking tape, and I'm just going to use this now just to pull off the masking fluid. Don't scrunch the tape up, use it flat on the paper and just sort of rub it off gently. Do make sure your painting is thoroughly dry because you might tear the paper. I'm actually now going to lift off some wildflowers with my stencil brush. So I've dipped it into some water and I'm just scrubbing now and lifting off and using my kitchen towel to really just lift off any excess paint. So it's quite wet and I'm just going in a circular motion, rubbing gently at the paper to remove some paint. The other thing I'm doing, I'm using the stencil brush to soften the edges where I use masking fluid. A lot of the times masking fluids leave this very sharp edge, and I didn't want it all the way around the outside. I wanted it to sort of melt into the background a bit. So I've just softened a little bit around the right hand side and underneath, and just left the top left hand side with the sharper edge. Make sure you keep washing your brush using clean water, otherwise that all your wildflowers will end up yellow or a muddy green colour. I'm wetting these main flowers now, and I'm going to paint this wet in wet. As you can see, I'm just loading my brush. I'm using the size 4 round brush, and I'm just dropping in this colour and dropping in water so you get some nice effects. And I'm varying the colours that I'm using, a bluey violet, a violet and a pinky violet. As you can see from the photograph, there's lots of shades in this flower. So I'm just dropping this in, trying to emulate that as best I can. I'm now mixing up the Opera Rose with the Quinacridone Gold, and I'm just putting in that colour just below the flowers there where it's reaching the stem, just that lovely rich pinky, warm pinky orangey colour. I'm dropping in a little bit of green, that's the Quinacridone Gold and the Ultramarine, just to mix it up because there's some really interesting colours at the bottom there. But just do your best, just play around with these colours, don't be afraid of them. You know, for the main part, the top of the flower is the ultramarine, the opera rose, and at the bottom it's the pink, it's the quinacridone gold, a little bit of touch of blue in there. I'm going to continue on painting the white wildflowers with ultramarine with a touch of cadmium yellow. I'm just mixing up a little bit of ultramarine with a touch of the cadmium yellow and just painting in some of the marks on these white wildflowers in the foreground. I've just added a little touch more of ultramarine and a touch of the pink just to create a little bit more shadow colour. I'm using my size 4 pointed round brush just to paint in the stems, this orangey green, quite watery colour really, because I don't want these stems to be too dark and come forward. And as you can see here, I'm still building up those layers of those white flowers with the lighter green and then the slightly darker green. Here I'm adding a lovely pink and then the ultramarine wet into wet on some of these smaller flowers just to give it a little bit more detail. You notice I'm leaving a little bit of a white border so it looks like the sunlight behind the flower. I'm just painting some little flicks here and there of some other wildflowers using pink with a tiny touch of the quinacridone gold, but you could use a touch of yellow, and just painting in these very thin stems, and then just dropping in a little bit of the blue, the ultramarine blue. So it's just kind of getting a feel. I don't want to overdo these wildflowers. I just want a few here and there. I'm painting a second layer now on this main flower using the ultramarine and the opera rose. I'm painting this wet on dry, and again, as I did in the first stage, I'm varying the colours. So I'm using a touch more blue or a touch more pink, and then I'm diluting with some water. So you've got some dark to the left hand side, diluting a little so you leave some lighter areas on the right. I'm painting the stem now with ultramarine and the quinacridone gold, but doing this wet on dry with my size 4 brush. Building up the layers of the other smaller flowers with the ultramarine and opera rose with the size 4 brush, wet on dry, just to give a little bit more tone and a little bit more detail. I'm painting in now some foreground grasses just to really sort of bring this foreground forward. I'm using the quinacridone gold, the ultramarine, and a little touch of pink as well to create some nice warm coloured grasses. The darker greens are the quinacridone gold and the ultramarine. It makes a lovely rich dark green. I've decided to put some middle distant flowers in, wet on dry, just sort of because I felt I hadn't put enough in with the masking fluid. You don't have to do this, and also you could mask out more at the beginning stage, putting some very thin stems in as well, some dilute paint. And for the final bit, I've decided to give it a little spatter to give it a bit of texture and put a few dark accents on this main flower. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and learnt lots about the techniques of masking out and lifting off and using white paint and spattering and all those yummy techniques. If you have any comments or questions about this video, please put them in the comments section below. And if you'd like to see other videos like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And don't forget, if you'd like to know more about joining my membership, please click on the video in the description below. Happy painting. Bye for now.